Hello, and thank you for joining today's Insights webinar. Today we are joined by Joan Graci of APA Solutions. She is the president and CEO. We are also joined by her partner, Jean Filipiak. Just a couple quick things. These are just a few housekeeping items. I know we are all used to this over the last year doing webinars and video calls, but just some tips to keep in mind. We will be answering questions in the questions box as well as the chat box. If you have anything come up, we will try to address it during the webinar. If not, we will get to it at the end. This presentation is also approved for HRCI and SHRM credits. We will have those available at the end. I want to start by thanking our sponsors. These sponsoring companies are who makes this webinar series possible. So thank you so much to the Arnold Group, as well as Employment Enterprises. I want to thank Kimco, as well as Luttrell Staffing, Temp Staff, Johnson & Hill, and Execu Team. So now for our presentation, The Future of Recruitment, I am going to hand things over to Joan.
Okay, thank you so much. So now this is a new, I know that most of us are used to it, but I just have to make sure, because I'm not used to go to webinar, that I can share my screen. So let me, yeah, can you see the presentation okay, Jean? Can you kind of, awesome. So I think then we're in good shape, and let me just see then how I can kind of move.
You're on the right track. Yep.
All right, that sounds wonderful. I'm just trying to figure out how do I do this in relation to keeping my webcam here. So I think that might be a bit of a challenge. Yep. So, all right, so let's go back and forth and we'll be agile, as we say. So our topic that we are going to be addressing is the future of recruitment. And how fun to try to slay this particular dragon in the time that we have together, which is now, certainly 60 minutes. So I want to forewarn our participants today that this is going to be certainly fast and furious. However, we have Jean manning the chat room, so please, in real time, don't hesitate to put your questions, your comments. All information in there is going to be certainly addressed, and happy to visit in one way, shape, or form as we're moving through this. Well, I will also encourage you to do, and I'll prompt you more towards the end of our time together, we are happy to share these slides, happy to share the webinar as a means for you to go back to. So let me start by giving you kind of a snippet of the work that we do within the confines of our third generation company. We are actually a full-scale human capital consulting firm, whereas it relates to the life cycle of an employee. What makes us incredibly unique is that we have an in-house neuroscientist, along with a smattering of these professionals across America, who have now taken their knowledge of how the brain is designed to operate, but have relegated it to the work world and workforce. So we are going to speak to you about our unique design as a species and how this knowledge can improve. And in this case, we're going to be talking about identification for your consideration moving forward, especially as it relates to your 2022 goals. Jean is one of our members that you have the distinct opportunity to at least EC, and then you are getting a snapshot of our in-house doctors who provide us the wherewithal to be able to share this knowledge. But our goal is not to make this a science experiment. Our goal is to give you metaphors and experiences that you're finding very relative to how you can perhaps parlay this knowledge into some type of workable solution as we're speaking about the talent shortage. So in order for me to speak to you about the future of recruitment, I literally couldn't do that unless I spoke to you about the past. So let's kind of take a waltz down memory lane, if you will. So we're going to be talking about how did we get here? Is this skill shortage a recent phenomenon? So I'm going to give you some of that information. We're going to talk about the present and how it relates to what we hope is this post-pandemic world. And then we're going to start to delve into the future so that hopefully we'll have opened your mind to possibilities that you hadn't considered as part of your human capital strategy, especially again, as it relates to identification process. So what I'd like to introduce you to is the first metaphor that we have found incredibly sticky for the organizations that we coach throughout primarily the East Coast and the Canadian region of primarily the Toronto area, whereas we compare our brain to a filing cabinet, so that you could visualize that, if you will, by just putting your two fists together like this. You get a sense of what the size of your particular brain is. And it's important, and I'm going to assume that the bulk of the people joining us today are in some type of hiring or decision-making authority. And what's important for me to share with you is, over the course of your lifetime, in your brain's infinite wisdom, it has collected a bunch of data through nature, literally from the womb through where you are sitting and listening today. And what it now does seamlessly throughout your daily interactions is shortcut to this personal Wikipedia, and you are making decisions largely based on this storage system. And it exerts very, very little energy for you to do so because the brain has monumental responsibilities. It is socially responsible for keeping you safe. It is physically responsible for keeping you safe. So it uses this storage facility to warn you about potential danger. And it loves this worldview. It is so committed to this worldview. Whereas anything that's outside of this perspective, in your brain's infinite wisdom, will alert, very similar to a fight or flight situation, that something is outside of your storage system. A very, very natural phenomenon. From the candidate or the employee perspective, they too have been garnering this worldview. And it's from a different lens. Their experiences, being more in this supportive or subordinate role, is coming now from their worldview. And although many of the items that are important to you as a decision maker may have a completely different set of circumstances around when it comes to the actual employee base. You're going to look at it from your worldview, they're going to look at it from their worldview. And it's important, again, for us to understand that our experience is unique. No two brains are alike, although designed from our ancestors, literally from the cave people to where we sit today. So when we're looking at that piece of it, we're talking about the past now. And how did this phenomenon begin? Well, we have to go back to one of the foremost authorities on this data collection piece. And prior to 2006, Manpower International had started to note that there had been some numbers that they considered alarming. As an organization that's very, very dedicated to people being your most prized possession and moving your business sector forward, as they noted that there was going to be these shortages, they started to take a data inclination, not only in the United States, but across the world. And what's fascinating about this is when we consider it 2002 and we're moving into 2022, that would lead us to believe that we had fair warning about this phenomenon. And what I did here was I wanted to show you like an 8-year span between 2006, a 12-year span in 2018. And you can see largely the jobs that we had seen that there was a skill shortage with in 2006. Literally over a decade later, we were still seeing that these particular positions were going to impede companies' abilities to grow, largely based on the lack of talent. So that's very, very important to take note of. And I would think your logical question would be, why is that? Why, from a math and science perspective, would leaders who largely had noted that this was happening within 2006 not be moving the needle on this over 12 years? And largely, again, when you look at the science behind how we're designed to operate as people, largely we have a distance bias even when we're recognizing something that is outside of our filing cabinet, which often leaders have a scorecard, and it's largely in direct correlation to business. How much revenue are we generating? So this whole human capital thought process is not something that we're as tuned to. Metrics in terms of sales and revenue growth tend to be where most C-suite are denoting how they measure success. So this seems like a problem that is well in front of us, and it's not really something that we feel we have to address right away. And when we fast forward to today, you can see that Manpower's list has gotten a little shorter, and they now are grouping this into this top 7 realm. But yet, look at how many of these positions, 75% of these positions were a problem back in the day. And let's talk about operations and logistics, which was number 3 in 2006. So we look at the supply chain and we look at what's going on within the confines of the California oceans and about how we're not able to move this material. Well, guess what? Here we are now feeling the ramifications of it. And now fast forward 2 decades later, and we didn't put into place what this data was clearly saying to us. And that is that this is going to continue to be exaggerated over the course of years if we don't mount a supporting initiative to counteract this issue. And for the HR pros that are on this call, this might seem unusual that it's coming in at 7, but it's largely because HR has now such a huge fiscal component. They are looking for that analytical skill within the confines of that traditionally high influencer, problem solver, collaborator. Well, now that role has now morphed into something that really requires a different skill set. And there definitely seems to be, again, a lag between what HR professionals are required to do versus how we have educated both internally or externally in preparing this particular group for the future of work. So this data in itself should be incredibly humbling for us as we're looking at 2022 and beyond, because we can see that we started, if you allow me to use the medical metaphor of maybe you were aware, familia, that you were prone to a particular disease. Let's say it's an unfortunate, perhaps, cancer diagnosis, and you never really did anything to prevent it or to prepare for it or to strategize for it, and now you're at stage 4. Well, unfortunately, we are now in a stage 4 commitment. So I'd love to be the bearer of saying, hey, we can spend this hour together and I can provide you with these quick tips that are going to alleviate what has now become a severe affliction. I would be absolutely lying through my teeth to even be able to suggest that. And often when we're talking about reframing our worldview, I want to emphasize for you to be challenging for yourself, for your team to say, how do we view our workforce as part of our future initiative? Because what is very, very interesting about what we're seeing is that when you're looking at the dynamics of the primarily Caucasian workforce versus where some of these underrepresented groups are coming from, it's very interesting to see where they're falling in terms of the dynamics of the unemployment scale. And when I hear organizations say that we haven't found this type of person, I often follow it up by asking, is that in alignment with your strategy? In other words, and we'll get into this in the second part of our time together, are we all looking for the same type of individual because we've been conditioned to do so? Have we spent the good time really asking ourselves, what does an impact performer look like for our future, for the design of an impact performer? Or are we going through this process of automation and we've been caught now in this mousetrap of doing the same things over and over and over again? And in the work that we're doing as part of this brand new rebooting of how we truly look at talent, it has been fascinating for us to see how from small to large companies, they're doing the same thing when it comes to identification over and over and over again. Yet when we follow up and ask, would you have ever kept over 2 decades your business model as stagnant as you have kept your human capital model? It takes them to a huge piece of insight where they're like, absolutely not. We would have never survived. There would be no way we would have answered our clients' goals. I mean, they just come up with a bunch of explanation, but it brings them to the insight of, oh my goodness, our planning from a business perspective has been largely devoid of those individuals that are going to help us continue to grow and to thrive past now what is going to be these post-COVID skills and competencies. So when we're looking at underemployment, this again is something that tends to be often misdiagnosed for most people that are in the identification space. Because when we look at recent graduates, and you'll notice to the right here, the different industries and which specific degrees are most underutilized or underemployed, what we're seeing large companies strongly be focused on this underemployed realm. They're looking and saying, wait a minute here, if I have an individual or a team of individuals that have now gotten their degree in philosophy? Are there these transferable skills that I can now take and move into a position with some training that is going to allow us to continue to move forward with our business strategy? So the component of who is going to be doing this training has got to be asked and answered, because in a couple decades now, we're looking for these ready-made people. We're looking for these individuals who can fill this particular void. And the data is strongly showing that unless we as organizations start to think about and consider who can actually take on these unskilled workers and help them to be skilled for whatever my needs are, we're never going to start addressing what is truly the cancer of this particular affliction. So one of our statewide construction companies who does national work literally formed an alliance with one of the community colleges. And in doing so, is strictly using this particular feeder to address their skill shortage. And it is amazing how just that collaborative partnership has reduced their skills shortage by, at last count, and this was about 3 months ago, by 80%. But it required them to literally blow up everything that they had believed about the identification process and really take on and figure out what their responsibility was in order for them to identify the individuals who had the potential to impact their organization. And I brought this as part of the past because we have a lot of baby boomers, that particular generation, that speaks about the millennials in such a way that doesn't support the math. And so I thought this was a very, very important slide to share. The millennials fiscally are in a completely different position than the baby boomers were. And I know that often the baby boomers want to compare themselves to the millennials, whose filing cabinets were engaged very, very differently than baby boomers were. It was a different set of parents. It was a different set of experiences, 9/11, the recession, everything that they stored in their worldview was very, very different. And when you're looking at the difference between a $2,000 egg versus a $28,000 average student loan debt, which is increasing literally all the time, this 40% versus these 13%, it's just very, very important to consider. And what I found incredibly impactful when I learned this information was that the millennials are actually, if you took into account the cost of living, are actually making less today. Forget about their expenditures for a moment. They're making less money today than a baby boomer was, and without a college degree. So this information in summation tends to be what I hope is very humbling. And I have cited for you the resources just so you have some type of example of where you can go. But I am telling you, there are so many resources that are just going to validate what it is that I'm sharing with you today, is that this millennial generation that is so impactful to the future of our organization is one that looks at work from a very purposeful perspective. They actually take more of this whole brain approach. And what I mean by that is they're not just looking at how can I use my skills. They want to know, where are they best used? What fulfillment is it with or to me. They are asking questions that are very, very meaningful to how their worldview was developed over the course of their lifetime. And often when we see how positions are being advertised, how people are interviewing, where we're seeing exit interviews going, it is a rarity that we find that people are leaving companies because of their technical skills. They are leaving companies because they cannot connect in a way that the brain was designed for. The brain is a connection machine, and it loves to be incorporated to a purpose. And often we're, again, using our filing cabinets to go through these activities that have served us very, very well in the past, and we're confused why they don't serve us well into the future. And I'm asking you to consider that now. What has COVID done to exaggerate this 2-decade affliction? What COVID has given the employee, the job seeker, passive or active, it's given them time to think. It has given the working poor time to think. See, they've never had that time to do anything but make the donuts, consistently go to work and try to thrive and survive. Now what they've done is they have now noted through the gift of added unemployment, the massive amount of people who have gone now and retooled and re-educated, those individuals that won't go to work for companies that they don't believe in. They don't go to work for people and organizations that disrespect them. They want to know what their purpose and place is in the workforce. And we're seeing this right down into manufacturing floors. This has nothing to do with a certain type of person and everything to do with what has now become the Grand Canyon. We have the employers on one side with a perspective that once that unemployment stopped, guess what? There was going to be a deluge of people entering the market. And what we found is that isn't what happened. And now we see leaders who are now asking to be considered a hybrid workforce. That's incredibly uncomfortable to their filing cabinets. I have to see you in order to feel comfortable that you're doing your job. I need to have you check in all the time. I need to micromanage this situation where we're seeing that 69% of companies are feeling a skill shortage, but 31% are not. And why not? Because these are the organizations that have started to connect with the human aspect of who we are as a species and work with that versus working against it, which is not easy because the brain much prefers stability because it is this prediction machine. It uses its history to dictate the future. But in the employee base, now they are taking over. Why are we seeing more strikes? Why are we seeing more freedom? Why are we seeing the working poor stay home? Because when you look at the math behind it, they literally, with child care and the multitude of other things that are in their expense category, can't afford, literally can't afford to go to work. We're not spending that time in thinking about that because we're so bogged down by what our worldview is. And that is going to continue to exaggerate this issue because when you look at the national research and asking organizations, why haven't you made a change? We know scientifically why this is difficult. And dealing with the here and now is a lot easier than looking at the future and adjusting and incorporating to what is this deficiency. But when we ask organizations at all levels, and Pew Research, Korn Ferry, some of the most esteemed consulting firms in the world have asked the same question, most organizations were betting on technology and enhancing technology and not investing in their people or starting to address this skill shortage and what was in front of them. The difference with technology versus a person, in a word, is neuroplasticity. And we've heard that in some way, shape, or form. Can anyone at any point in their life cycle create these new pendiflexes, these new connections? Absolutely. So if you, again, lead within the fact that anybody has a change, has an opportunity and a capacity to add to their competencies, but if you have leaders that truly don't believe the value of individuals, the value of people, you're going to consistently have this disconnect within the confines of the recruiting strategy. Because if we're just focused on the business side of it and not the people side of it, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to mount a strategy that's truly in the long term going to benefit your organization. Because here's the data. When you're looking at this Great Resignation, it's not this 20 to 25-year-old age range that's actually leaving positions. It's actually this 30 to 45. You're in that millennials, largely, because that was such a wide generation, where they're very, very much making the courageous decision of purpose. When you're looking at how many of them are going into their own business, entrepreneurship, largely, again, because of meaning, because of purpose, they don't feel comfortable having the corporation or the company decide their future. I think, again, 10.9 million open jobs at the end of July 2021. And when you look at 2030, it is getting more and more difficult. And how well have we downloaded that knowledge base from the 60 to 70-year-old? How much have we engaged with them to have an intellectual property transfer so that we're better preparing our workforce for the future? Yeah, we continue to make those donuts, but they get a lot sloppier as we haven't considered reinvesting, and it's right here. When we look at the training dollars that are being invested, there has actually been a reduction. Here it is, we know we have a skill shortage, but we're actually spending less money on developing people. And even that is largely on technical training and not competencies around critical thinking, around emotional intelligence, around those, again, whole brain approaches. It's still very much relegated to that technical piece. With the exception of large organizations, we've actually seen a reduction in the amount of dollars that we're spending per learner, which goes back to that original question, who's responsible for training this next generation workforce? Is it the college and university sector? Well, what happens if these individuals choose not to? Let's look at the data. We have many people that aren't graduating from school and they end up underemployed. There's just, again, so many voids in this that we have to ask ourselves as we're addressing that. And I can give you like a firsthand experience from our organization. In our identification realm, we now offer, as part of our placement strategy, an onboarding program that helps individuals transition in their whole worldview to the company that we place them with. And what we saw is that our retention rate went through the roof, even though we had a very, very solid retention rate, because now we were providing tools to individuals in a very safe place to be able to say, you know what, taking a new job is scary, but we're going to provide you these tools that we found often small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have onboarding, they have surfboarding. So it's very much a kind of fend for yourself. But what we're seeing is even in that identification piece, training has come to be one of the most important decisions when it comes to somebody accepting a role. So again, when we look at an average job posting, oh, there's all sorts of information about a company history, about what a company wants, what a company needs. But yet, if we looked at Nike and how they post an opportunity, what they do is they work with the brain, not against it, in that they talk about the person first and what the person hopes to accomplish by this work engagement versus talking about their history, their wants and needs. They immediately use a narrative to create a connection to even a person who's going to work in their retail stores versus against. So our research strongly shows that most people are repelled by ads, whether they be on social media, whether they be through Indeed or one of the other portals. Most people are repelled by an opportunity. So the question is, even the way that you're conveying your message about wanted and needed and required is not speaking to our most primal instincts as a species. And those organizations that have recommended and responded to that absolutely positively have gone through this experience. So again, please, as we're getting into this 3-step process, I encourage you, put questions in the chat room. Jean will certainly, I'm not focused on her, so I won't be able to see her. So Jean, I'm going to ask you to interrupt me as you're seeing any comments or questions that you think are important to share. And during our 20 or so minutes together as we're going through this, any real time, certainly everybody can learn from. So I'm going to just take a pause there and just make sure that you don't have to interrupt me, and I'm asking you any questions you have, anything that you're seeing that I need to be aware and mindful of.
Yep, so the chat room is quiet, but that's okay, because I know that shares to me that they're really digesting the great information that you're providing. And I love where you're going, and there's just some things that I noticed through this presentation is that distance bias, Joan, before you get into the 3 steps, because there was so much talk in regards to it's that department or it's that industry that's experiencing a shortage, but now it's very clear that there's a shortage in almost every industry, in almost every department in an organization. And I think the future of recruitment is really based on understanding that and then putting that plan together, which I'm excited to see the 3-step process.
And I think, again, Jean, what you're saying is, incredibly profound on many, many different levels, because again, as we're looking at this piece, what I'm suggesting here is this is a journey. It took us a couple decades to get here. And again, we're on life support. I don't want to diminish that. And what I'm asking you to do is literally blow up your filing drawer when it comes to this whole recruiting piece. And I know that that's disconcerting. And from a math and science point, it is incredibly uncomfortable. And I know that you might share this information with someone else who says, poppycock, this just isn't true, right? And hopefully you ask for this presentation and you share some of these data points, because it is very, very clear. When we look at truck drivers, this is absolutely not a recent phenomenon. All of the supply chain, we have been seeing this. And if we did have a cancer affliction this many years ago, I can assure you we would have died several times now. So there is no way that we would have made it through a life-altering situation without us making steps to truly address this. So I know that what I'm proposing here can be daunting. And that's why I want to say to you, the brain does not like daunting. And you can have a macro goal, but the brain much prefers micro goals. You now understand that perhaps you're speaking a language that is leadership speak, and perhaps it's getting lost on that employee base. So I'm only suggesting here that when you're looking at 2022, if your macro goal is to identify more impact performers, make a micro goal as well. For anybody who uses SMART goals, I have to tell you, they are based in a brain-based methodology. Everything that a SMART goal represents is actually in direct correlation to how we're designed to operate as a species. I think where we've largely missed the boat is we've always separated emotions. We're actually one of the few countries in the world that's done that from technical skills. When you see especially Switzerland, Norway, those organizations that have always taken that spiritual, emotional, and technical and looked at it in its totality, not only are people healthier, but they just don't have the same level of issues that we do with disengagement, with absenteeism. We're bringing up this mental health issue that's in direct correlation to the stress that we've experienced. Pre-COVID, you had a Pendaflex dedicated to how we work. So did the employee. Now post-COVID, guess what? That experience changed them. They've worked from home. They have a new Pendaflex. As a leader, you might not have a new Pendaflex, but guess what they do? So again, how do we bring these together? What do you want to accomplish? So if you're concerned that you are not connecting to the employee base like you had hoped, what can you do? So your step one might be, over the course of the next month, look at role models of organizations that tend not to have a difficult time. All right, a Patagonia is an example. Nike, those organizations that have traditionally been able to find individuals doing research on how are they communicating, spending some time doing a case study with your current employees. What made you come to this, especially new employees? Following data instead of your filing cabinet. Look at your filing cabinet is well determined. Your filing cabinet wants to do the best thing. You are trying to find individuals so that you can get the stress away from being able to produce whatever product you're involved in from conception to completion. But if we don't bridge this Grand Canyon, you will not win the war on this. And when you look at the international data, the countries that tend to minimize emotions and the impact they have, emotions to the brain are, in its infinite wisdom, relegated to all sections of your brain. And it's the way for the brain to alert you that this particular situation has deep meaning to you. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to react. You don't need to think about it. You're immediately going to be triggered into a reaction. And often we treat emotions like not at work. You get uncomfortable if your emotional charge is different. And again, because we don't understand that when we diminish emotions, it's the same to say to a person, I prefer you not digest food. I prefer you not breathe normally. That's in essence what you're saying to a person, that you're asking to diminish their emotions. And when you look at depression in terms of diminishing emotions, when you look at, we have the highest level of police suicides since we've been tracking data. And it's largely, again, because we have a set of circumstances that we think are a norm. Well, it's not a norm to the human brain. It might have been a norm to our filing cabinet, but it's not a norm to the human brain. And it's time that we really, really start coordinating that, because let me tell you, this is just going to get worse. And if we don't start taking that first step to say, wait a minute here, I know we don't love that the employees have control now, because we've spent hundreds of years having control, but they got control now. And I'm telling you, with these numbers, I don't see that control changing anytime soon. So again, Jean, I'm going to just take a pause there before I go on to 2 and just make sure that I'm being respectful of you.
Thank you very much. So it's interesting as we move on to step 2, the one thing that I'd like to ask Joan is, you had mentioned earlier making the connection to the job seeker is so critical, as the brain is a connection machine. How does one create that connection more so, a little bit more specifically in an ad? And the reason why I asked that question is because if you look at our past recruitment, what did you do? You placed an ad and you hope they fluttered in. They're not fluttering in anymore. We could use any posting mechanisms that are out there, from social media postings right on up to ZipRecruiter posting. They're not responding at the rate that they used to. So I'd like to get your take on that and how they would do it. And with a great partner like Haley Marketing, I just feel like even a role as a recruiter has changed into a marketer, marketing, writing, content, being the expert and all that. So I'd like to kind of filter that through, because I can imagine that the recruitment role to sit in that seat has changed so drastically and moving in that direction. And I would like to kind of expand on that, or if that's part of your dialogue going forward.
No, I appreciate that. And what I would say to you is, again, I think that what is often misaligned is that the company has a filing cabinet as well. And within the confines of the company filing cabinet, there is this perspective that every single person within the organization is committed to helping the business grow. Here's our metric. And what I'm saying to you is, we now need to understand that people have to move into that corporate filing cabinet as well, whether it be a small business or whether it be a large business. And that means that it's not just the recruiter's responsibility to identify talent, just like it isn't just the shareholders or investors or C-suite to create business. There are many, many, many different people that are relegated to that. So again, I think as far as a recruiter, what I would say is the brain is inherently selfish. And when you start talking about the company first, often you've left them. Videos are incredibly impactful because the brain is very attracted to narratives. So if you did a recruiting video, it tends to be more impactful. If you got more involved in TikTok, which obviously most people think, well, you know, that's just a social media, TikTok actually works with the brain. It doesn't work against the brain. So all of these things that, again, we considered more out of sync. One of the organizations in the hospitality industry that has come to us, we have talked about mentorship and how we see a lot of information technology companies that are bringing these young people up through college, making this investment in mentorship, but they have their next set of workers already in the queue. And that's what I'm working on this one hospitality company, in that there's a lot of programs where the individuals in high school can literally be paid to work within the confines of your restaurant. You provide them some mentorship, and guess what? You know, this could be your next gen workforce. See, again, these are all new in their growth mindset ideas. A home health care company who came to us who is really struggling identifying home health care workers. When we did the data analytics on their most impactful PCAs, I hate to tell you, they were 65 to 80 years old. How could somebody 65 to 80 be taking care of people that were 65 to 80? Yep, the bulk of their impact performers was within the confines of that. They totally relegated their recruiting strategy to starting to go into some of these in senior apartments. They worked out a collaborative effort, because what they found was a lot of retired people still wanted to make a difference. And they could scarf a bunch of part-time people and help them help others. So again, I'm not saying, Jean, in any way, shape, or form, any of the stuff that I present you is easy. Again, this is not a one step. I'm only saying that as companies, like I owned a temporary agency, and I understand, you know, certainly the challenges that are in front of them, and now, you know, what they're experiencing, because certainly they're experiencing the same thing. Now, guess what? You can go to a site and pick up an independent contractor, where the temp agencies never had to worry about that before. The world has vastly changed. You need a laptop in a bedroom in your parents' house largely to start a business today. So I would only say that when you're looking at what your bite-sized people are, what steps do you need to do to make this a reality? And that, again, we have meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, but often they don't have any goals to them. They don't have any outcomes, and we continue to talk about the same thing over and over again from our fixed mindset. You need to throw a growth mindset at this. And it doesn't matter if you're a small company, because we've had it, to whether you're an international company, because we've had that as well. You have to get comfortable with this being very uncomfortable, and starting to create this more meaningful employee experience. And how do you put together just a group of subject matter experts that you can now say, all right, if we want to learn how to speak to an employee in a new way, if I go to your website and I'm an underrepresented group and I see white men in their 40s, what the brain does is it signals that individual, they are not aware of this threat. If I can't see me, it can't be me. It's just the way the brain is designed to operate. So again, those things that we think, if you're looking to build equity, if you're looking, and we hear this all the time in the underrepresented groups, well, hey, you know what? If they're as qualified, did they get the same opportunity to be as qualified as the Caucasians? And when you look at the data, it's clear, no, they have not. Have they had the same mentorship? Have they had the same apprenticeship? Have they had the same college and university? Again, your worldview is going to convince you that you know all the math and science behind what it is that I'm sharing with you. I'm challenging you to challenge that, because often your opinion is only as good as your last kind of flex. And what's wonderful about what I'm suggesting here is, when you use your filing cabinet, your brain is dark. There's no light. It doesn't require electricity. It just keeps on using the same information over and over. When you throw a growth mindset at your brain, it lights up like a rainbow. If you go through a walk through a bike path or a scenic area, look at your brain on a bike path. It goes to a rainbow. Don't bring your phone, right? there are ways that we tap into this that are incredibly healthy. Here's the result of that. When you get out of that fixed mindset, regardless of whether you're prone to dementia or Alzheimer's, based on your family, based on your lineage, you can fend it off for up to a decade. If that isn't incentive enough to throw a growth mindset at things, I honestly don't know what is. But having this stuff and putting together a task force in some bite-sized piece with a measurable goal, in 1 month, we're going to have solved this part of it. Let's run an ad that's different. Why do we ask for survey results and then we don't take them? Why is it that? How many times have we seen that, Jane?
Yeah, too many times. I actually had a client the other day as I got involved in their consulting side of the recruitment. And that was the number one thing in their town hall meeting they were saying was, we took a survey last year, we never saw the results, and now you're asking us to take another survey to get a pulse about the engagement factor. So no, I can't stress that enough, that even with an organization like that, there was some miscommunication where that message did not get delivered. So therefore, their meaningful employee experience was blown up within that time frame. But to that point, when you're looking at creating a meaningful employee experience, I also want to add to that a job seeker experience. Really dissecting what a job seeker has to go through in order to get to the promised land. And with this same client, we spent a good amount of time really analyzing that job seeker experience, and we really condensed it. We made it more specific, what they had to go through in order to make it happen. And then they found their openings filled in a very quick amount of time because they just looked at that whole process and perfected it. And really where they got the bulk of their people back from is they rethought or rethink their referral program. So they looked at the referral program in a completely different way with our advisement, and they were able to bring back boomerang employees as well as get additional people through that revamp of the referral program.
Well, Gina, I think that leads very much into your systems. Like, I got the software systems. I get that we're trying to be lean, right? And we have keyword software or whatever you're using, making judgment about a resume. Again, based on your filing cabinet, based on your worldview and perspective, this really leads into the system. Do you have a system that supports this skill shortage? And again, I get it's more work. It is going to be something where those individuals that you put these very, very specific qualifiers on, you have to keep in mind, and we saw that as we were doing research with one of the large healthcare companies, insurance companies, and a national footprint. They had turned off so many people based on the way that their application process worked, all of the experiences that you had to go through in order to get to it, and then you never heard a word. They were completely and totally ghosted. I think this gets back to, do you believe you have two customers? And that's what we see in the 39% that have really worked towards building this shortage. Those 39% believe passionately that their internal customer actually supersedes their external customer. If you were to ask me the difference, that's it. Their internal customer is key and they're king. And the reason is they're following the math, they're following the productivity, the engagement, how they've been able to substantially grow. Because if you have a happy internal employee, you absolutely are going to see this in your external. And again, I know that for a fact. We've invested in a couple companies that we were convinced that if we put that on its ear, we would get a return on our investment, and we absolutely has. The science works. But I think, again, when you're looking at your systems to even see if they're post-COVID ready, are your leaders ready for the competencies, not those technical competencies, emotional intelligence with this mental health crisis that we're dealing with, which again, don't get me started. I mean, that should have been front and center, literally. I mean, from the beginning of time. But, you know, again, does your leaders have the competency? Does the owner of an organization have the competencies? When you look at the key competencies post-COVID, I'm telling you right now, they're all in the regions of the brain where you have to alleviate stress. Stress is the killer to anything that resembles creative thinking, higher level problem solving, any of those things. When the brain is in that fight or flight, it totally rebalances every single aspect of your body, from your blood flow to your chemicals, all preparing you for that flight. The cortical, that outer shell, goes dark because you've realigned resources to that primal instinct, so you can't think in an impactful way. It is the killer of all. Yet often what leaders do each day and company cultures do each day is they exaggerate that threat region, not recognizing how that diminished return is going to affect their business, both on a short and long-term basis. So I know that we covered a great deal of material. And again, I am very, very happy. Please link in with me. Jamie, our social media expert, she will do a post about this. Please, we would love to hear your comments. Anybody who is interested and leaves a comment, we're going to offer you a complimentary audit of your talent brand. To Jean's question in our part 2, how are you sitting? How are you connecting in a variety of these different mechanisms? We're going to give one of these multi-$1,000 opportunities away, literally, to a person who comments on our post in any way you see appropriate from what we were able to share with you today. And as a thank you to Haley, who we consider a very trusted partner and somebody that is certainly so committed to this growth mindset and how do we bring this all together to create this better experience. So Jamie put right in the chat room her information, and again, link in, look for the post. Truly, I know it's a lot of stuff, but I'm proud I got through it in 60 minutes, Jane.
I know you're only 2 minutes over, so good job.
Thank you. I think that's pretty darn good. So, all right, so Mackenzie, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, both Joan and Jean, for being on this presentation today. A ton of great information, just so much. There are a few questions, but I just sort of want to go through these sponsoring companies, and then we'll get to the credit slides. And while people are taking down that information, we can maybe go through those questions that we've gotten.
Happy to stay on and help in any way.
So just to give another thank you to Luttrell, to temp staff, to Johnson & Hill, as well as executive team. Again, thank you to the Arnold Group, to Kimco, and to Employment Enterprises. We couldn't have these incredible insights webinars without them, so thank you so much. The credit IDs for HRCI as well as SHRM are up on the screen, so take those down. You just need the IDs as well as the Future of Recruitment title. So I'm just going to go through these questions really quick, and then if anybody else has any questions, feel free to shoot them over to us. This first one says, do you see a correlation between employee retention and a point system in place in the workplace?
I'm gonna assume that a point system, I'm assuming that alludes to like some type of reward. So if the point system is in direct correlation to, the ideal is that an organization has a mission statement, and that becomes the symbol that brings both the employee base, the leadership base, and that company filing cabinet together. So you just want to make sure that any reward system that you do is relegated more in that reward section of the brain versus that threat region of the brain. When we look at employee handbooks, those are some of the worst examples of working within the punitive side of the brain. Like, I get we've got to do those legal attributes to it, but there's nothing about how to be a star performer, and there's everything to do with how you're going to get in trouble. What's not appropriate. We need to start balancing that. So I love a point system because it's a goal and I know how to get it. Make sure that it's tied to reward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. This next one says, I work at a manufacturing company and I hear you talking about training, and that is a magnet to gaining new hires. We do train our hires, our entry-level positions, which are we're having the most trouble filling. So is still a hard position to fill. So now what?
Yeah, and again, I would go back to looking at how you're filling that. So I mean, right to your ad, are you communicating more about the candidate? And again, don't hesitate to drop a note to Jamie at apasolutions.com. I'm happy to send you a sample of that, so you can literally see it in real time. So, and what I would say to you is, are there particular groups that perhaps you haven't given thought and consideration to? So we just did, and I'm just going to be incredibly direct, it was a jail release program where we were working directly with an association, a not-for-profit, where there were specific type of offenders that they were training. And we had a multitude of construction companies that were more than willing to give these individuals who had gone through this program an opportunity. The retention from the work release program into the construction companies literally has been mind-blowing. These individuals have been so thankful for an opportunity to move into the workforce, almost like a rescue dog, that second chance, that second opportunity. I mean, this is what I'm really saying is, be thinking about, have you considered, Jean created this wonderful venture with the Goodwill in the Western New York community. Goodwill has a manufacturing facility right on site. Goodwill is overrun. They cannot produce the working poor quick enough through this. People are getting picked up. So again, I would just really challenge you to look at how you're interviewing, look at how you're advertising, and then again, are you considering all the different pieces? Because Jean has just done an incredible job with our manufacturers.
I would like to weigh in, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the question back would be, what type of training are you providing? Because training typically in the manufacturers that I serve, they did provide training from forklift to technical training. But when you add the non-technical training piece to it, when you have a captive candidate, I will tell you, it has closed that candidate in accepting that position. Right from, we're providing you the how to communicate, professional development embedded within the offer. But then I also, to Joan's point, yes, those associations are good, but if they are suffering in their population, which in many areas they are suffering too, then I go back to that database that you already have of people who applied in the past, because there is a resurgence that if you have a great creative message, you can get them back into your life and spend some good quality time looking at your internal database, because you have gold there that people are not revisiting. In our data, it takes about 6 touch points to get a person to respond. And I was speaking to a hiring manager and they were just like, oh, that's like my yellow flag trigger that, if I text them and leave a message, they don't respond, then they must not be interested. And I said, hold that fort. You have to look at the brain and mind. Job seekers today, there is a blend. There is no longer an active job seeker. There's no longer a passive job seeker. They're all job seekers. And at the end of the day, they have a lot of things being thrown at them. Emotional issues, personal issues, work issues. We're all working harder, smarter, and faster, that they do forget that someone reached out. So having empathy in your interview process is very critical, and framing your message and reaching out more than twice is going to be a lifesaver to you, is really where I wanted to chime in.
Thank you. No, I think that's absolutely great information.
Any other
All right.
question?
That's it, actually, everything we have. So thank you both, Joan and Jean. That's just incredible information, so much to go through. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Yep, and again, in the chat room, don't hesitate to let Jamie know if you'd like the presentation so you can go back through it. That's absolutely no problem. Happy to help. And again, check us out on LinkedIn, look at the post. We'll certainly identify Haley as part of it. And hopefully we get to EC some of you soon. Have a great afternoon, or depending on where you are in the country.
Thank you.